What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up.
A portion of Bill Wilson's letter. I think that many oldsters who have put our booze cure to severe but successful tests still find that they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say, humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. Those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance, urges quite appropriate to age 17, prove to be an impossible way of life when we are at age 47 or 57. Suddenly I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence, on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression. We examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to 12th step ourselves and others into emotional sobriety.
Well, thank you. Hey, all right, you know the question. What stood out tonight, huh?
In our relations with ourselves.
Elaborate on that. What did that mean to you tonight?
How do we think and talk to ourselves? What meaning do we give it, but what is going on with the me against me? There's some stuff to sort out.
Yeah. I'm trying to get Thom Rutledge into this study. Thom, where are you? This is like trying to find Waldo. Anybody ever play with Where's Waldo?
Hey, and I gotta tell you, Alan, I'm happy to see we're back home.
I am back home. That's right.
I see it. I saw it. I was so happy.
That's right. You were over here. Where is Waldo?
I'll just sit up in the corner. I don't care.
No, I'm gonna get you. I'm looking for you now.
I'll be the heckler.
Oh my God, it happened again. All right, I'll work. Oh, there you are. Now I can get you. Don't move. Wait, where did you go?
I added him to the spotlight.
Thank you. Oh, great. You did it. All right. Well, listen, we are continuing our exploration of self-esteem, emotional sobriety, and the steps. And we are at step 12. Do you believe that? God, we have taken a long journey, haven't we, in terms of this, and it's a wonderful journey. I've learned a lot along the way, and I think all of us have learned a lot from each other, and we hope that you've been learning along with us. And tonight, Herb's going to kick off step 12. So, Herb, we're turning the meeting over to you, and we'll join you after you finish your presentation.
My name's Herb. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm honored and very pleased to have the opportunity to give a summary of each of the steps in this workshop, this panel on self-esteem and the steps and the core principles. It's quite a large context that we're talking about. I'm not going to do a deep dive into step 12 by my standards anyway. It's too rich and quite frankly has such a deep content but I will give an overview of it. Again, an overview by my standards. I've crafted the step here. It's a total quote, but I've set it up so that you can see the actual topic outline that I will be addressing in a superficial way by just acknowledging this component part of step 12. It has probably 3 major parts. That whole concept of awakening, the whole concept of carrying the message, and again, the practicing the principles. But I'm even going to refine those major topics a little bit so that we have some unpacking of each of those in some way. We started out in step 1 in bondage of addiction. That's the primary source of suffering that drives most people into a 12-step program. As I understand it, there's over 100, there may be many, many more than that, different types of 12-step programs, the original program being Alcoholics Anonymous, and the second longest 12-step program being Al-Anon, the counterpart to the addict in terms of substance and process addiction, the counterpart being the Al-Anon, who's addicted to the addict in some fashion. And it's about attempting to find freedom from that through this process. Lots of people call it a spiritual program, and some people refer to it as the spiritual side of the program. And we had a crusty old timer here in the area, since dead, but he used to say, there's 2 sides to the 12-step program, the spiritual side and the outside. Let that sink in. It's all spiritual because it's about a relationship with power. It's about a relationship with spirit. And so that's my synonym for spiritual, is relationship. This is a process, a precise process and methodology that Bill crafted after he had his own experience in the Oxford group with the 6 steps of the Oxford group. When he was writing the big book, 4 Years Sober, he said, I want to squeeze out any wiggle room. And as he had crafted it, it turned out to be 12 steps. Those first 3 steps for a relationship with power. Notice, I didn't put God up there. These first 3 steps for a relationship with power, for life, for reality, relationship in the context of emotional sobriety. The next 4 steps for a relationship with myself. The next 2 steps, a relationship with others. And what I want to give a wrap to tonight is the final piece of the way of living that Bill calls it, a way of life, a way of living. Steps 10 through 12 is a wash, rinse, and repeat of the first 9 steps. It was Dr. Berger that actually gave me the terminology. The first 9 steps are the program of recovery, and the next 3 steps are the program of living. The first 9 steps address the addiction, a promise of freedom on page 84 at the end of the 9th step promises. We are placed in a position of neutrality. I'm quoting. We are placed, here the grace, but the promise. We are placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction, but he says very clearly that we enter the world of the spirit at the end of the 9th step. We enter the world of the spirit and are placed in a position of neutrality, but we're not cured and we have a daily reprieve. We're not cured of our unmanageability. We have a daily reprieve from our selfishness and self-centeredness. This is the awakening that brings all of that out. And this is what attracted me to and has kept me in the 12-step process and program, and has actually lit my fire so that I try to carry this message to anybody who will listen to me, because it's a message of hope and it's a message of transformation. I was a seeker for a long time, even in the rooms of 12-step recovery, 4 years sober. I was a seeker, but I wasn't a finder, but I didn't know that I wasn't a finder. And this process was a process of awakening, turning from my self-centeredness, which was actually diagnosable, that self-centeredness, to other-centeredness. I had always thought of myself as a Renaissance man. And as I discovered through this process, I was a Neanderthal. But doing this process, I became awake to that. That was the turning from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Notice it's like a coin having two sides. That's the point of the image. One side is my relationship with power, with life, with reality, with God as I don't understand it. The other side is my contribution to humanity, the people around me, especially those people in a 12-step community, especially those people in a 12-step community who are in an alcoholic recovery program. The spiritual awakening, what does that mean? Bill gives us Appendix 2 in the back of the book, which explains it. This is my summary of his explanation. A spiritual awakening is a change in the way we think and feel, but especially in the way we behave. And the key is it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. You've heard me talk many times about the mystery of the connection between willingness and grace. My willingness to take action and grace that delivers me across the goal line. I cannot get there. I cannot get here from there. But here I am, and the only explanation is I was carried. I was placed in a position of neutrality. I was placed in a position of transformative, radical change. I paid attention. I stayed gently pressed up against it. I did a lot of work. I've engaged a lot of people to help me, professional and otherwise. But the outcome is disproportionately larger than my input to it. That's my definition of change. That's at the spiritual level, at the mysterious level, at the level that I don't really understand. But when I look back over my shoulder, I'm totally humbled by the deliverance and totally gratitude for the outcome and the ability to articulate it and help other people find it so that they can find the freedom I bought. I found that freedom to know that I put the bars up. Nothing holds me in bondage of unmanageability except my delusions about myself. I entered this world of the spirit by the time I finished step 9. Bill says we commenced this way of living as we clean up the past. We've done our business of the first 9 steps and we've recovered, placed in a position of neutrality, but we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve from our obsession. We have a protective shield because of our connection to the light, because of our connection to the power, because of our connection to God as we don't understand it. Our way of daily living, Bill calls it our way of life, but it's daily. Step 10, that spot check inventory. When I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me, course correction. During the day, in the evening, checking it out with a radar sweep of inventory again, and then in the morning, getting guidance, both to know what to do and the power to do it in prayer and meditation. And then all day long, 24/7, having at least the lenses through which I look is how can I help? Emptying that channel that's been filled by grace, that's been cleared by inventory, operating on principles. I didn't know I had principles. And I didn't know that I didn't have some principles that I really needed if I wanted to be a decent human being. I started out wanting to be a priest. I left there after 7 years because I knew that that wasn't my calling. I wanted to he thought, help people. No, I really wanted the prestige and the power at that time in the late 50s, early 60s. And then I thought I would be a psychologist, and I did all the work to become one, and decided at some point that that wasn't the calling either. And I thought it was about helping people, and it really wasn't. It was about having the prestige and the power, and then the money that would go with it, he thought at that time. Underneath, there was always this, I believe, hunger, this energy, this some type of a yearning to be a decent human being and to contribute. And I found my way in the 12-step program. Step 11, improving my conscious contact, providing some sense of wisdom. In step 12, enlarging that capacity for compassion, which I had intellectually had, but I never had it organically transitioned into my heart, through my heart to my feet. And Bill says we grow in understanding and effectiveness. It's a process, not an event. We begin with the entrance into the 12-step program, and through the steps 1 through 9, get physical sobriety. Then we begin practicing on a daily basis, especially step 10, the tool of emotional sobriety. And we bring it home with the practice of steps 11 and 12 in terms of receiving guidance and helping other people. But it's like a dimmer switch. It can go down a notch at a time at the same time, not cured daily reprieve. The best kept secret in the rooms, not cured daily reprieve. What does that mean? Of unmanageability. That's a subject for another time. Perhaps you've heard me talk about it. But if in fact we don't practice principles, but we compromise our principles, I read it the other day, the first relapse is not the drink. The drink is the evidence of the relapse. The relapse happens with the first compromise of principle. And the dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time, and the shield of light disintegrates, and the obsession returns, and we're back into our addiction. The dimmer switch goes up a day at a time, a notch at a time, with a daily practice. The dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time with a daily compromise of principles. The 12-step program has many, many moving parts, of course, meetings to identify the problem and have support from the community. The big book is the textbook, an instruction manual. The 12 steps are in the big book, but I couldn't read it and understand it. I needed help to find that precise process, even to learn how to pray and meditate, despite my background in my pursuit of a professional religious life. I wanted to be helpful, but in fact, I was so filled with myself, not knowing that I was filled with myself, that I was absolutely contagious in the contrary sense. A sponsor, I find, is the biggest key to the process, because if you have a relationship with somebody who has knowledge and experience, and you have an effective relationship with that person, meaning you talk to them and you listen to them and you take instruction, this is including accountability. The word sponsor is not in the big book, but the chapter 7 is about helping other people, a blueprint of how to help people. Again, Roger and Dr. Berger introduced me to Nathaniel Brandon, and I believe it was him who had over his office, as you enter into it, the sign, "Nobody's coming." And I really heard that. And I saw, once I finished this step, that I'm the one that I'm waiting for. Steps 1 through 9, and then the practice of 10 and 11. But organically, it delivers us. into a daily practice of receiving the light and keeping the channel clear. That step 10, aware of the disturbances in us, taking responsibility for keeping in alignment with reality. This is the essence of emotional sobriety. The reality, the evolution of reality flowing, and my self-will putting me in contrast to the flow. I call it self-actualization, using some of the words from the Maslow hierarchy of values. To become a lantern, using step 11 as a daily practice, to become a lantern so that the light shines on the path that I stand by, so others who are wanting to walk the path can walk the path in the light of my experience. Meditation and experience, meditation and improvement of my consciousness, meditation, an experience of self-realization. Listening to this workshop over these months has really helped me pivot off of Brandon's comment about nobody's coming. Who is coming to help them? This is an organic thing that happens to me and each person who does the 12-step process, realizing that, in fact, we're equipped to help carry the message. I think it was Augustine in the 4th century, a Catholic bishop, who said, wherever you go, preach the good news. Now, as a Catholic bishop, he was clearly talking about the Bible, the New Testament, the gospel of Jesus. But listen to his conclusion: wherever you are, wherever you go, preach the good news. If you have to, use words, meaning be the good news, be the change. Sponsorship, the word is not in the big book, but he's staying with the metaphors I'm using as the lantern and the light and awakening, lighting the path for others. This is our way of life, to carry the message. What's the message? Bill opens chapter 7 with this line, and I'm quoting, it's not a paraphrase. Nothing so much ensures immunity as intensive work with others. Immunity, we're so sensitized ourselves in the world today because of the pandemic to the word immunity. This is the immunization. In one of the lines in his own story, Bill Wilson, on page 14 at the bottom of the page, he says, we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. And you hear it in the rooms, wonderful wisdom sayings. You can't keep it if you don't give it away. Practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, what are the principles? Bill never gives us a definition of, or even a list of the principles. I believe he uses the word principles as a synonym for the steps, because at the end of the list of the steps on page 60, he talks about principles, practicing these principles in all our affairs. And he talks about not being perfect, progress, not perfection. Knowing that over half of us have an inclination toward perfectionism. And he wants to set the bar high, but he also wants to have it as an ideal, which is like an incremental improvement. That's why I like the dimmer switch concept. Practice these principles in our relationships, chapter 8, to the wives. Practice these principles in our family, chapter 9, the family afterwards. Practice these principles at work, to the employers, chapter 10. Practice these principles in our fellowship and community. That's not the title of the chapter 11. It's a very fancy poetic title, A Vision for You, where he recaps the process and gives us the promises of this life that flourishes. I've just recently created a refined list, a revised list of principles that I've developed over the years, standing on the shoulders of giants who have created lists prior to me. This is based on my knowledge, based on my experience, based on my interpretation, as recently as in the last couple of months, refining and changing some of the words I've used based on my current consciousness. I've given a copy of this in a much more extensive article that describes each of these virtues, each of these principles, and the actions that are connected to it, to Kristen, who may or may not distribute them, but I'm pretty confident it'll be on Dr. Berger's website at some point. This step 12 is a step that leads us organically to have authentic compassion. That is a sense of energy and urgency to help other people, to transmit the light. I'm not the light, that was big news, but I am a lantern and I keep the lens clear. Guidelines and guardrails, I call them principles. There's two different kinds of principles: absolute principles, those principles of nature built right into the structure, like the principle of gravity. In the 12-step program, that equivalent core principle would be rigorous honesty, as Bill describes it in the full page on page 58, how it works. But there are also other principles from social norms and human development, traditions and cultures. My intention to actually help. That's the lens through which I look. It's been a training program over time. Will this actually help? These words. Will this actually help this attitude? Will this actually help this behavior? I looked up the word altruism because I don't have a really clear and good definition of unconditional love, at least at this point. And altruism comes as close as I can come, and that is doing something for the benefit of somebody else with no possible benefit for myself. That comes as close to it as I'm comfortable with at this point. Self-transcendence, self-actualization from the inventory, self-realization from the prayer and meditation, and self-transcendence from the operating my life on principles and helping other people, becoming that lantern and lighting the path. It's an interesting insight here that I had some time ago about the 12 steps, built very much to deal effectively with the human being. The structure. Humans are human for only two reasons, as I see it. Number one, we have a mind that knows. It's not an organ in the brain. It's not the brain. It's a function of the cortex. The ability for me to know, to name, to self-reflect. And the other function that makes me specifically human is that I have free will. And all entire civilizations have built on the premise that each human being has the ability to make a free choice, and that they're responsible for their choices, the actions that follow it, and the consequences of those actions. From my standpoint, it's interesting that all of the even steps are steps from the mind, knowing and naming steps. And all of the odd steps are decision and action steps, built singularly for the transformation of human beings, to improve our consciousness and to enlarge our consciousness so that we can become over time and evolve into, grow into decent human beings who have ability to manage their emotions and connect to the community in a helpful way. Our way of living, this slide is not very good. Head in the clouds. Oh, it is not so bad. Bill, these are words from Bill Wilson, summarizing the program, our way of life, our way of living. Head in the clouds, Step 11, our relationship with our relationship with God, our relationship with life, our feet on the ground, our contribution to the humanity, the large fellowship of people in our community. Okay. So that's sort of the highlights of it. You can go to my YouTube channel to find lots more information or lots more presentation on aspects of each one of the steps of 10, 11, and 12, especially a deep dive into sponsorship and principles. Thanks.
Wow.
Wow. We said that simultaneously, Tom. I don't think we could have timed that much better.
I'm speechless.
That's a trick.
It is. It's good.
Yeah.
All right. But I tell you what, I won't be speechless now. I just need to respond personally to the stuff you were talking about yourself, Herb, about the being full of yourself. You're going toward the priesthood, and then you realize, what are you really after? Going to the, and it's like, it's such a good reminder, because I really do believe step 12 and step 11 and 12 are just daily practice steps for me that help me to not consistently, but constantly address what I call my hypocrisy syndrome. It's like we have anybody who's in the process of people helping, whether we're doing it professionally or otherwise, it's like we have that advantage. I tell in my training workshops, I tell other therapists, I said, we have this advantage that we're constantly in therapy. It's not our own therapy, but we're constantly in therapy. And it's like we need to be asking ourselves on the way home at night, how am I doing with those things I'm talking to Ben about or Sally about and stuff like that. And what I tell them is if you keep coming up with the answer, I'm doing fine with it, then you need to go back and look again, because nobody's always doing fine with that stuff. It's fine to give ourselves credit where credit is due, but I just tripped back when you said that about full of yourself, and for some reason I found myself drunk on the bar stool at the Stockyard bar and lounge and bar and here in Nashville, where I worked my first job as an alcoholism group therapist. I was years from my own sobriety, but I used to sit in that bar and give my card out to people that I was drinking with, so they could get some help because they were clearly having a problem with drinking, and it's like, and that's I mean, talk about arrogance, talk about just lack of any insight whatsoever. And it's like, and it wasn't about helping, it was about manipulation. What you had in your presentation there, Herb. I looked at those two words, I thought, nope, it's all about power. It was all about, it's like there was no fucking altruism coming from me. That was all about aren't I something? And of course I didn't realize, with hindsight, you look and go like, I'm a clown, there I am, a drunk guy. I'm a comedy. It's like I'm sitting there drunk, handing my business card out to people to offer people to give them help. So that's that part. That's the part I want to say just about. I don't know if it's as much about responding to everything you were talking about, Herb, but just when I think about my first pass thinking about step 12 with this is this idea that that I am with step 12. First of all, I love the fact that Bill ends his part in step 12 in the 12 and 12 with the serenity prayer, because that's 12 steps in a nutshell. That's it. Everything comes back to the serenity prayer. It's energy efficiency. You do something about what you can do something about, and stop trying to do something about things you don't have a chance in hell of doing something about. And it's like, I mean, that's a lifelong process, just doing that. And so the idea for me of that, basically what I think about, rather than beating the holy crap out of myself like I did for so many years, whether that's self-hatred and that should monster in there, the idea that I have this tough, loving voice that's a part of, and it's definitely part of that 12 step, which basically in putting myself out there, saying my part of my job as a human being is to be of help and service to other people, is to be constantly, not just consistently, but constantly insisting with compassion that I address my hypocrisies, that I find them, not to beat myself up for having, but realize that's my job. So the idea that I go out and, I look for, that I find hypocrisies. Okay, well, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to find these things so that I can course correct, is like the term you were using. It's like, and that's, to me, that's the selfish part of the program, is as I'm doing that, as I'm being the best human being I can be, which involves taking care of myself, but also sharing with others, making connections to my expanded self. Basically, I'm simply keeping myself honest with this step.
Yeah,
So.
I think that's really the benefit of consciously working with other people. If you're conscious, it will be an accountability relationship.
Yeah. As opposed to one drunk giving another drunk a business card.
You were doing the best you could at the time.
I was. No, thank you for that, because I was saying that to a client this very day, and it's something I believe in wholeheartedly. It's not okay to judge ourselves, an earlier version of ourselves, by what we know now, even if that's me yesterday or if that's me back doing that. It's like, I like telling the story. From this distance, it's entertaining, for one thing, and it's educational to me, and maybe hoping the other people to realize that's how far off the mark we can be. I'm not a dumb guy. It's like, but people say, like, oh, I'm dumb. And when I was younger, I used to say, they say, oh, no, you're not dumb. You're not stupid. You have addiction. And then later I got older. I realized when people say they're dumb and stupid, I go like, okay, and what I say instead is, like, addiction is takes otherwise intelligent human beings and makes us stupid. Basically, when we're living from a value system that the addictions established, basically, then we're, we can be stupid. I can be just despicable. It's like, but it's like that. It's because I'm operating off a value system that's not mine. And what all of us here in this meeting, well, the four of us are doing, and other people here are doing every day of our lives, we're doing is we're trying to live as congruently to that value system as we can. None of us are going to get it perfect, and sometimes we're going to be way off the mark, and a lot of times we're going to be doing okay. And I believe both. We course correct, but also I always want to say to people, because we're not really good at this a lot of times, credit where credit is due. When you're doing well, it's okay to acknowledge that too. So, yeah.
Thank you, Thom.
That's not bad. Yeah.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Raj, you want to go?
Sure. Thom, I just want to point out that in sharing that story, you are very much living what you're talking about, right? Which is that becomes another experience in your life that you proceeded to engage in course correction around, right? A major course correction. So that I'm just wanting to add to that message of,
Thank you.
Apart from condemning myself and hating myself and all of that stuff for past behavior, for one thing, what I'm coming to recently, when I'm dwelling too much on the past, and I haven't yet figured out how to put this into words well, but I'm just in denial about what reality is when I'm not accepting what I've done in the past or what I've experienced in the past. And I've never thought of it quite that way before. I'm just not accepting what happened is what happened. And then, whatever I need to do with that in the context of the 12 steps or in the context of self-forgiveness or forgiveness of others. But I like you're just using your experience as an example in that way of it's always a process of course correction. When I'm sitting with clients, I really do my best, maybe too much so at times, to acknowledge the ways that I don't nearly have my stuff together, right, in my life. And if we're talking about an issue that I struggle with, I almost invariably find it helpful. And I do it in a way where I'm very conscious of the client's needs as well. At least I hope I am. but I freely acknowledge my many many shortcomings, right? So it's another part of that process. It's not an effort to be humble, it's just an effort to be truthful, you know, an effort to be reality based.
That's great.
So,
I love that.
well, but I see you do the same thing. I see Alan do the same thing. I'm sure Herb does the same thing. You know, it's like there's no
Yeah,
need.
but really, Roger, the way I do it is a client tells me their problem, and I say, "You think you got problems?" I go, "Let me tell you a few things about me," and then I just take off.
Do they ask for a refund?
Yeah, I was gonna no. He pays them at the end of the session. Herb is how Tom decides.
Hey, listen, I'm sorry. I mean, I know I'm being disruptive here, but it's like I have to tell you guys, I had a client today because I'm getting ready to go through this radiation treatment where my throat's going to get sore, and a client said, you know, you may not feel like talking so much down the line, so I understand be flexible about schedule. And I said, well, I think my clients may like it if I don't talk so much, and this client had a great comeback. She said. She stopped, she thought, she said, you know, you're right. You might even be able to raise your rates.
Good. That's
Wow.
good.
Thank you so much. It costs more, but I talk less.
Yeah. I wanted to read a little bit of step 12, where at the very beginning, the words of Bill Wilson, the joy of living is the theme of AA's 12th step, and action is its key word. Here we turn outward toward our fellow alcoholics who are still in distress. Here we experience the kind of giving that asks no rewards. Here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives, as you just heard Herb reference, so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. May find emotional sobriety, right? When the 12th step is seen in its full implication, it is really talking about the kind of love that has no price tag on it. And then a bit later, when a man or a woman has a spiritual awakening, the most important meaning of it is that he has now become able to do, feel, and believe that which he could not do before on his unaided strength and resources alone. As Herb keeps saying, this is something that is done to us. We need to be open, we need to be willing, but it's not something we are fundamentally in charge of or doing. This person has been granted a gift which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. A new state of consciousness and being. And just to tie it back into self-esteem before I turn it over to Alan, I love that you focus on spirituality as a relationship, Herb, to power, to life, to reality, to God, to one's higher power, if other people prefer that terminology, because that idea is the core of self-esteem. It's our relationship to reality that is the most fundamental dimension, not our ego, not our pride, not our self-concept. It's our relationship to reality that is the fundamental defining point of our level of self-esteem. And that involves exactly what we're talking about here, surrender to reality. And it's incredibly hard to do a lot of the time, especially our most painful realities, right? Or the ones we're most afraid of, which also usually involve a form of pain that we don't want to experience, right? But it's not easy to do, to surrender to truth, to surrender to reality when it's not how we want it to be. I fight it as much as anyone, believe me. But that's the critical piece for both step 12, from my perspective, to spirituality, if that's the word one wants to use, and to self-esteem. So those are the points I wanted to make. Thank you, Herb, for every time you do a presentation, there is so much to think about, Herb, to think further about in the presentations you do. So thank you so much for that. Well, great.
Okay, if somebody's asking in the chat, Patrick Newman, can you put down the link to our YouTube channel. Somebody keeps asking for how do I watch these videos and how do I get to them? Well, look, I just wanted to point out the obvious, since I'm a Gestalt therapist, is this is the longest discussion we've had introducing any step. So just be aware of that for a second.
Right.
It's the longest. Now, that's not coincidental. That's not just because Herb wants to talk more tonight.
Right.
It's just because this is the culmination of a lot of work that we've done up to this point in time. And what we're trying to capture is the effect of all that we've done getting to step 12. And it's described as a spiritual awakening, right? That we're having her emphasize the awakening part of it. Well, I'm just going to try to capture one part of this, because I started my discussion last week talking about self-esteem is using our consciousness to have an honest relationship with reality. It's very much with what Herb and I has been talking about, is that emotional sobriety is having an alignment with reality, right? An alignment with reality. So an honest relationship is another way of describing that alignment. I like it. I think it's rich because it has that texture of honesty to it, which I think is good. But what does that mean? Well, I'm going to try to capture one dimension of that. There's many, but what it means is that we embrace the paradox of life. Now, what is that? Well, the paradox is that there's always two sides to everything. I'm powerless and I'm powerful. Hear what I just said. I am powerless. I am also powerful.
Yeah.
I'm living, but I'm also moving towards my death.
Right.
Things are permanent. Things change. I mean, it's this holding this paradox is so important. There's things that happen that are out of my control in my life. There's things that I have influence over. See, holding this paradox in our life becomes such an important piece of finding emotional sobriety. Because if emotional sobriety also involves an honest relationship to reality, it means the reality of being able to embrace the paradox in our life. And not only the paradox in our life, but the paradox within us. You guys heard Thom talk about it. You heard Herb talk about it. Roger talk about it. But there's also two sides in me, always. You know, Thom and I talk a lot about the common term today is internal family systems. But it just says that there's this intrapsychic process. There's a lot of different parts to me. The paradox is that some of these parts are polarized. They're opposites. And being able to be aware of those and have a relationship with all of them. So what we're striving for is to be able to bring ourselves into harmony with life. That's what this is about. That's where the freedom comes in. And that comes by bringing in this harmony into harmony, finding a way to take what looks like it's polarized and in conflict and finding a way to bring them together so that they can be joint contributors to our wholeness. All I want to say tonight, it's all my depression will let me say tonight.
Amen.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.